Hey everyone, how's it going? Ooh, amazing. So exciting to be here today. My name is Caro.
I'm Jen.
We are both product designers from Trade Republic. In case you don't know Trade Republic, we are a broker with a banking license. That means we're regulated by the BaFin, just like Deutsche Bank, Sparkasse, and any other German bank out there. As Daniel said, we are on a mission to democratize wealth and allow each and everyone to put their money to work. Some years ago, this was reserved for the rich and wealthy, and we were nowhere near of having that accessibility and knowledge on almost all social levels as we have it today. Trade Republic was actually one of the first to disrupt this exclusiveness around capital markets, making it possible to trade more than 10,000 assets from your phone within 3 taps. That makes us one of the biggest brokers in Europe, with more than 1 million customers, saving over 6 billion euro with our service. And here's a little fun fact. We got there with at no point being more than 5 product designers. We're hiring, by the way.
So, it didn't take us long to find a topic that we wanted to speak with you all here about today. And Daniel gave a great introduction, and if you couldn't tell from the title, we'll be talking about biases. Basically, we want to introduce the concept of overcoming biases or learning how to leverage it within your design. We're pretty proud of the title, too, because we think if you don't deal with biases now, if you don't learn how to overcome or leverage it, then you will be paying for that later down the road. So I'll hand it back over to Carl to start us off.
Thank you, Jen. So the first question that may arise, what is a bias? This is what a quick Google search gives us: favoring or having prejudice against something based on limited information. Bias is the tendency to think in particular ways that can lead to systematic deviations from making rational judgments. Now, that's a lot of buzzwords, we know, so let's break it down with a very good example of a psychologist called Daniel Kahneman. What you can see here is a racket and a ball. Together, they cost €1.10. Now, the racket is €1 more expensive than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Okay, think about it for a second. It's a very simple question. Together, they cost €1.10. The racket is €1 more expensive than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Lock your answer in your head. 10 cents, right? Actually, no, that's wrong. It's 5 cents. The racket costs €1.05 and is therefore €1 more expensive than the ball. Now, if the ball would cost 10 cents, that would make the racket €1.10. Together, that would cost €1.20. Now, raise your hand if you got that correctly, if your answer was 5 cents. Okay, that's about 10% maybe. Now, the question is, why do so many people answer this incorrectly? Even 50% of Princeton, Harvard, and MIT students do not get this right. Why? Well, it's because our brain is divided into 2 systems: the automatic system and the conscious system. In this example, system 1, the automatically functioning and intuitive system, answered the question. Only when you thought more carefully did you actually activate your system 2. System 2 is analytical, rational, conscious. And the interaction between these 2 systems determines the way we think, the judgments and decisions we make, and eventually, our actions. Now, what exactly happened in those people who answered that incorrectly? Well, the impulsive system 1 took control and answered the question. Usually, it consults its friend, system 2, when it's overwhelmed with a task. But in this case, it seemed so simple that system 1 assumed it could solve it alone. And as we learned, this was the wrong approach. Now, you might be wondering, why am I telling you this? Why is this relevant? This is a design conference. What are these systems? Well, it's because we can actually utilize, oh, I forgot a slide. That is no problem. So, why does our brain use system 1? It goes down to a phenomenon called the law of least effort, which describes that our brain uses as little energy as possible when it gets a task. Matching the answer with system 2, again, the analytical conscious system, would use more energy, so our brain decides to save the effort and let system 1 do it alone. Again, this was the wrong approach. Now you might be wondering, why am I telling you this? Why is this relevant? Well, it's because we can actually utilize System 1 in our decision making. And Jen is going to give you some great examples on how exactly we can do that.
So we have 5 different ways in which we want to showcase or example the ways in which we can leverage System 1 in our designs. So these are very practical ways that we've seen through Trade Republic that we'll explain to you now. So the first thing we can do is limit the steps that a user needs to take. Now, as Carl just said, with the law of least effort, the brain wants to do as little amount of effort as it can. And we want to leverage System 1 in order to do that. Now, if you think about something like the onboarding process, System 1 is in place at this point because you're entering information such as your name, your date of birth, your nationality. These are things that come readily and easily to the mind. So you can start by putting these sort of information pieces together and having it get simply more complex over the course of your onboarding flow so that the user can easily transition from System 1 to System 2. Another thing that you can be doing is having the autocomplete like you're seeing here. So this again limits the amount that the user actually needs to input on their own, but it also minimizes the occurrence of any sort of typos or errors that might occur, mostly because when you're using System 1, because it's so unconscious, it's easy to just mistype or not really go back and correct because you assume that you've entered all of that information correctly. The last thing that you want to think about when you're kind of dealing with an onboarding is understanding if you need to do all of these steps right now. So think about validation of an email. If you ask a user to validate their email, now they're going to switch to another app. They have to open that email, they have to click on a link, and then come back into your app to continue the flow. And that's all assuming that they haven't gotten sidetracked in the meantime. But if you're able to allow the user to continue through that flow and use System 1 entirely, then you're able to minimize the amount of effort that the user needs to take, and you can just have them complete the validation, say, in 24 hours. So that's something to think about. Next, we can show less but offer more. This is another way of saying progressive disclosure, basically. So we want to minimize the amount of information that a user needs to understand and process at any given time so that they continue using System 1. Trade Republic has a huge portion of our user base who are brand new investors, as I'm sure a lot of you guys have as well. They've never invested, they don't know the jargon, they don't understand maybe what asset they should be investing in. So something that we decided to do is create a quick questionnaire for new users who are coming in to say, hey, what sort of assets are you interested in? What sort of sectors or regions would you want to be investing in? From there, we were able to tailor the experience down into one card up there, where we showcase an individual match for that user. And then we still allow the user to explore and associate with all of the rest of the information. So in this way, you're not limiting what they see, but still accessing and making it easier for them to kind of find something that makes the most sense for them. Give examples. So a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? And System 1 really wants to rely on pictures. It associates and it validates certain things right away when it sees images. That's part of what System 1 does. So if you think about a barking dog or a fire or a beautiful flower, your brain automatically knows how to react to that specific thing. In the same way, we can utilize graphics and visuals within our apps and within our process to help users to associate right away. So this is Trending Topics, which is a relatively new feature for Trade Republic, where we basically grouped assets into topics that users would find interesting. And we started to use graphics to represent that so that the users didn't have to necessarily read or try to understand exactly what's happening, but they can gravitate towards that image right away. The next thing we want to look at is utilizing mental models. I think this came up in one of the talks earlier today as well, but basically you want to utilize these models that people are used to and that make them feel comfortable and confident. So there's mental models in place for things that we do every day, like brushing your teeth or driving a car. It's things that maybe were difficult when you first started doing them, and that would have taken System 2, but now because it's become automatic, it moves into the System 1 processing. So the same thing is happening within UX and UI. Basically, if you think about an X, that's always going to be a close, or an arrow pointing to the left is always going to go back, never forward. So you can start utilizing these sort of mental models in your platform and in your features to make users feel comfortable immediately, therefore using System 1. Something that we do on our browse page is, again, these cards up here. You see that they're getting cut off at the end. This is a pattern that people have seen now throughout a bunch of different apps. When they come in, they're able to know exactly that there's going to be content beyond that they can scroll to. When we introduced this over a static list, we actually saw that people were scrolling all the way to the end, and therefore it validated the assumptions that we had about these mental models that people were using. And the last thing that we want to look at is providing defaults. So again, we want to limit the amount of information or processing that the user needs to take. So if we can start if we can start providing defaults for that user, then they need to take less cognitive load to actually go through any sort of process or to accomplish a task. And it does, like, if you're seeing that this is happening through user research or through data, you can start implementing these sort of things into your actual flows and processes. But you don't want to limit the user, right? You want to still allow them to have the flexibility to answer anything that they want. So in this case, we're showcasing a few different suggestions for our order flow, where the user can see, like, okay, I can enter 10 euro or 100 euro, or the 3 dots, which allow them to go into an open entry field. So this is something new that we're introducing, which we're very excited about. But it basically allows the user to feel like, okay, I can enter anything, or I have a lot of possibilities with this. It makes it feel accessible, especially for new users coming in. They can see, hey, 10 euro, that's such a low barrier of entry, which again, because our user base is so new, we want to make them feel like investing 10 euro is acceptable. They don't need thousands of dollars, thousands of euro in which to do that. But System 1 isn't always great. There's a lot of things that kind of can go wrong with it. And one of those things is confirmation bias. So basically, confirmation bias is the tendency for users to agree with or favor previously held beliefs or opinions. And this can come into play, especially when you're asking suggestive questions. Is James friendly? Studies have shown that asking suggestive questions such as this actually cause participants to agree with the statement that's at hand. Basically, they want to not need to think, right? By adding a suggestive word in this case, friendly, people are like, yep, okay, James is friendly for sure. The brain automatically confirms that. And it's really prevalent as well in user research. We ask questions like, do you like this design? I know I've certainly asked it. I'm sure everyone in here has asked it at some point, right? Whether it's to stakeholders, your teammates, or to actual users. But phrasing the question in this way is suggestive. And it primes participants to only think about the positives of that experience, and therefore not giving you a full range of feedback or insights that you might be looking for. Close-ended questions, or these leading questions, cause people to have a bias within what they're giving you as that feedback. So a better way in which to ask this would be something like this. How do you like this onboarding process? Or explain anything you liked or disliked about it. So you can remove these confirmation biases from your questions by looking through and saying, can I make this more open-ended? Can I take out any sort of leading or suggestive words? Or how can I make this more neutral so that the user feels like they can answer in any way that seems fit? And basically, at this stage, we want people to move beyond, right? So all of the examples before were leveraging System 1, but in the user research side of things, we want people to move beyond that automatic processing into something that's more conscious and grounded in their actual thoughts and feedback.
Now, the impact of what Jen was just describing is even greater when there are emotions involved and deeply ingrained beliefs such as race, politics, climate change, women's rights, you name it. An interesting thing here is that time also plays a role. You might be familiar with the so-called IKEA phenomenon, where they found that people place a disproportionately high value on things they created. A 2011 study even found that consumers were willing to pay 63% more for furniture they assembled themselves. It's because they spent so much time creating it that they started to emotionally charge this piece of furniture. And an interesting thing here is that there's a parallel to design. If we spend weeks and weeks creating something, there's a very high likelihood of us emotionally charging our projects. And that will eventually result in us favoring research evidence that says our design is good, and being more skeptical of findings that show potential problems with our design. On the other hand, if you spend a day or two working on a paper prototype or something and you get it out to users or even for internal feedback, you will be way more likely of accepting that feedback and putting it into your design. Now, what you can see here is a classical week of a designer at Trade Republic. We have several sessions in place that allow us to remove our bias as much as possible. Of course, we will never be able to fully remove it, but we can get as close as possible. And these sessions allow us to do so. So one thing that's very interesting here is the 360 design. This is a designers-only session. And we start the session with a thing called the Wheel of Names, which basically randomly draws a person from the group. And that group then presents to the rest of the people. And we do that around 2 or 3 times throughout the session. And it allows, on one hand side, that we always use the session, we never skip it. It allows that everyone shows something. And of course, we align all the different initiatives within the design team to make sure we're following kind of the same strategy. And most importantly, we get very detailed design feedback from our peers. What we have here at the end of the week is also very interesting. This is a session within the cross-functional team. So we have engineers in there, we have data people in there, we have the product manager in there, and of course the designer, who is the one presenting to the group, and they present their most recent work that they have been working on. Now, recent is the keyword here. This is not supposed to be a refinement. This is not supposed to look at like final work and discuss only feasibility. The idea here really is to bring data and engineering into the process at really any stage and make sure they can get their feedback as well and give their feedback as well. All these sessions allow us to remove our bias, as said, as much as possible. We also have these sessions with PMs. You might be familiar with them or have them as well, where we basically discuss what is the progress on our current project, how are we doing, are there any blockers or anything. We have the product review, which is just a stakeholder review with all the most relevant stakeholders of that particular project to make sure they're all aligned and they understand what's the status. And then, of course, these are only the internal ones. What we do on top of that is usability testing and A/B testing. I mean, you probably all know these funny memes about design. And of course, they're funny. It's mainly about design and feedback. You can see the life of a graphic designer, I think for products similar. But if you're being really honest with yourself, you will find that most of your designs got way better after feedback. So what we're trying to say here is that you should really open the door to let people challenge you. And furthermore, detach from your designs, get that feedback, get it early, get it often, as much as possible. It's the perfect way into making your products way better.
Okay, now we've gone over quite a bit of actionable takeaways, so we're going to go ahead and summarize those quickly for you guys. Limit the steps. Remember, the brain wants to do as least amount of effort as possible, so try and limit the steps that the user actually needs to go through in order to complete any given task. Show less, offer more, or progressive disclosure. Make sure you're asking yourself, am I showing the right information at the right time and to the right user? Give examples. Show images over written words because it associates and activates system 1 thinking and processing, which is what we want to do. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Try and leverage that within your designs. Use mental models. Try not to reinvent the wheel just for the sake of reinventing the wheel. Users want to and associate already with patterns that are in place, both in life and within the UX and UI process. So try and leverage that as much as possible. Provide defaults. Make it easier, again, for users to get through any given flow or process by providing defaults that they might feel comfortable and associate with. Unbias your research questions. Ask yourself, can I make this more open-ended? Can I remove any sort of biasing or leading words in it? And make sure to just read through your scripts, whether it be things that you're writing or your PMs are writing or your peers are writing, and try to remove any sort of bias from these questions, as it will lead people into biased answers. Get feedback. Get it early, get it often, get it from a wide range of people. As Carl mentioned, it really does improve the end result. And lastly, detach emotionally from your designs and from your process. We want to try to remove any sort of subconscious confirmation bias that we are inadvertently adding to our designs and our process.
Now, to finish off, we want to discuss one final form of bias as a quick learn. This is the peak ending rule, and it describes that humans place a disproportionately high value on the end of an event. So, without further ado, here's a cat. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you both. It was really amazing. I'm saying this a lot, but honestly, not just you, all the speakers have been really, really great. So I'm going to jump into some questions. We have, it says here, compliance and legal departments in the investment world can often impose rigid constraints on your design, making it harder to use. How do you challenge the bias of these departments? The departments in the investment world can often impose rigid blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and we were just discussing that earlier at the networking session. Constraints from compliance and legal are often very difficult, and there's sometimes not really a way around it because they're just there, and you can't just say, well, I don't care. So you have to kind of find your way around it. I think it's very good to, and kind of remembering all the different sessions that we had here, collaborate with these different functions, understand what are their needs. Is this really something that we have to do, or is this more like a nice to have? Can we somewhat work around that? Communicate with these people. Legal compliance is often like a very isolated function. It has not much to do with product. They just tell us what to do and we say no. So kind of bring both to the table, discuss it, and just collaborate on that matter more.
Have an open conversation.
Exactly.
Yep.
Incredible. We have another question here. Can you share a little bit more how you do usability testing? How do you test design with your customers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a few different things that we do. So there's tests that we run internally. So even before it reaches our customers, we will take a flow or a feature from whatever we're working on. And we have a huge user base within our own employees. So we'll go to them, and we're able to even tailor down to like people who love dividends or who are only investing in ETFs, right, within our employee base. And these are people who have never seen the flow or process that we're working on, and we'll do some usability testing with them. And then a lot of times we'll end up going through and doing A/B testing as well. So we'll try and get a much larger sample size for whatever we're working on and really rely on data for some of the outcomes that we're working with.
Awesome. So we still have time for more questions. So let's take a look if there are any questions here. Marcela, thank you.
What other ways you have to eliminate? I mean, is there any more ways to eliminate the bias as designers, like in the creative process?
I'm sure that there's thousands of ways, right? This is just a way in which we've seen works within Trade Republic and within our team. I think one of the biggest things is to be conscious of yourself and the biases that you might be introducing, and also to get feedback and get different perspectives, and that really helps to open up the conversation and to open up your thinking to hopefully remove those biases.
Yeah, exactly. I think awareness is really the first step into that direction of removing the bias. Just kind of looking up potential biases and understanding even what is a bias and what are other forms of biases. Sometimes you read through them, you're like, oh, I do this all the time. So you kind of start by understanding them, understand that they exist, they're on all of us, and again, we will never fully get rid of them, but acknowledging that they are there and kind of reminding yourself when you're in a particular situation, oh, I might be introducing a bias, and then kind of working towards it or against that.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen and Carolin. This was really incredible. Please, big round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.